today we have an incredible guest to discuss what might be the hottest pro tech trends and much more in 2025. Who is it, Liam?
It's Dan Bigham. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. You are the head of engineering at Red Bull Bull-BORA-Hansgrohe now, and you've got experience with Ineos Grenadiers. But the main experience that you have that I think is applicable to our audience and us is your history racing at the likes of Castle Combe and the Milton Keynes Bowl. How I was actually looking back and I found some cool photos from your blog spot days, I think.
Oh, God.
The internet
never forgets, right?
Yeah, it never buries them. How early did you start thinking about Aero? Because like those Milton Keynes Bowl races, you've got an Aero helmet, a skin suit, I think Aero socks if they existed back then. And like the rest of us were chopping around invented helmets and all of that.
Yeah, I was a bit ahead of the curve. I think pretty much as soon as I got into the sport, I started thinking about it. It's something that when you're studying engineering, obviously modules around aerodynamics and simulation, etc., you think a lot about the importance of the things that you can change. And I don't know if that's normal for normal people. I guess I'm not really a normal person in that respect. So yeah, from the moment I started, I really took interest in that side. And obviously once you put numbers on things, you can understand how much you can gain in performance terms. And yeah, nowadays it's a little bit more challenging and definitely harder to find those improvements relative to everybody. Like the level of competition in the UK, okay, like some more races are disappearing, but like the effort that people go to be optimized is pretty scary. It's impressive now.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I mean, especially in like UK time trialing, that's one of the things that people really kind of like clocked onto in the last 10 years. And I think you can turn up to like a Wednesday night TT and everyone has a kind of setup that is better than like 95% of people at the kind of Tour de France 5 or 10 years ago. I guess like, it's kind of, you mentioned like it's getting harder to find the gains there. I kind of that was one of the questions I had. Is I think like obviously in the last few years we've seen a number of kind of big leaps with like low hanging fruit in kind of like bike and tech setup. Do you think is there any more kind of like low hanging fruit to take advantage of in kind of like road racing and time trialing, or is from this point out until we see kind of like another kind of like materials revolution, maybe with like 3D printing, is it kind of like going to be marginal gains for the next few years?
So I guess there's two answers to the question. I think we're a long way off like peak aero or peak performance. So like where does the true optimal lie? We're a good way from that. However, the path to get there is not that accessible, is the problem. So for Joe Public on the street, the people going to Milton Keynes Bowl or Castle Combe, it will become harder and harder and harder to find those improvements. Whereas the well-funded teams with people like myself working for them and trying to optimize on a rider by rider, course by course, roll by roll, conditions by conditions, all those things are what demand unique solutions. And that's hard. And obviously also expensive and time consuming. So we're a good way away from peak performance, but we're also not easy to get there.
So into 2025, what do you think are going to be the key kind of aero tech trends?
Good question. Don't want to give the game away of what we're going to do.
2024, I think one of the things that came up in 2024 was obviously Pogacar switching to 165mm cranks and everyone going, oh, short cranks.
This idiot tried it.
That could be a good idea. Like, do you think we'll see anything like that in 2020? I mean, obviously you might not want to give the secret away, but like, is there kind of like something like emblematic like that you think could, you obviously like, there's still quite a lot, we go to the tour and people are running narrower bars. Do you think we're still going to, people are running maybe 40s or 30s, 38s, but do you think we might see people pushing that UCI limit a little bit more next year?
Getting closer, and then the UCI will start pushing back a little bit more as well, which is a constant point of discussion. And obviously it interplays with many things. People talk about safety and what the impact of handlebar width is, and I don't believe, my personal opinion, but backed up with some data, is that handlebar width largely doesn't impact on bike handling and safety. But that's a big old rabbit hole to go down, and probably not one for this podcast. But I think the trends going forward are more that people are willing to explore areas that otherwise people had accepted were optimal or shouldn't be changed. And I think the willingness to change the progressiveness of the peloton is why it's getting quicker, and records are continuing to be broken, or at least one of the reasons why. And I think that will be a big trend. Like short cranks, is a really good example. I switched from 170s that I did my hour record on in 2022 soon after to 160s, and that was a very significant improvement for me, like very big. And I kind of wish I'd done that prior to the hour record, because I would have stuck a few hundred more meters onto it. But hindsight's 2020, and you learn these things as you go through. But I think people in general are just going to try new things, push more extreme solutions, and that's quite exciting, because it might be that one specific setup works for a specific type of race. For example, Paris-Roubaix, which people are well aware requires a unique setup, but every single course and race and even rider role within a team as they're trying to achieve a certain result requires a different solution. And I think that is the kind of direction we're going in, and what's quite exciting, and that I think we'll see more of in 2025.
Why do you think, despite, obviously you mentioned how kind of like more progressive the pro peloton is coming, but from the outside it still seems as if like the kind of like pro peloton has a little bit of an aversion to real like aero bikes. Every time a brand like releases a big, proper full fat aero bike, we get told how incredibly fast it is. And, generally when we ride them, I'm just like, God, this thing is fast. But then, maybe it's because they just don't sell well to Joe Public, who still thinks that, a 6.8 kilo bike is what's fast. But we don't see them race that much at the Tour or, any of the other big races outside of like, the Canyon Aero, for example, which is an incredibly light aero bike.
I would say it's probably primarily because weight weanieism is still going strong within the World Tour peloton, as frustrating as that is. And it's not really grounded in maths and science, because that doesn't bear it out in most scenarios. That's not to say there isn't a time and a place. If you're trying to race up Ventoux or up d'Huez, yeah, absolutely you want to sit at the weight limit. But the vast majority of the guys racing the Tour de France are not the people racing up d'Huez, etc. They're the ones who are trying to either win a sprint stage, win a breakaway stage, or help their GC contender get to that bottom of the climb in the best position with the least amount of energy expended. So I feel it will change in the near future. And you do see some brands going down two directions. They have their ultra lightweight climbing bike that's as aero as they can within 6.8 kilos, give or take. And then you've got the other extreme of let's just make it as aero as we can. And it's as close as you're probably going to get to a TT bike with drop bars. So I do feel that that's probably the direction most will go in, because they're kind of your two scenarios. You've got your GC, like race up a hill really fast kind of guys, and you've got your everybody else that where mostly aero is the critical performance determinant. And I think the reason it's not been so clear cut is modeling, like simulating a road race is really, really challenging. In a time trial, it's super easy. We can tell you tyre A versus tyre B, or helmet A versus helmet B, what the difference is likely to be, or at least like be very confident in the magnitude and the direction. However, in a road race, because you've got so many variables and they're all probabilistic, and you don't know if someone's going to attack or not, if you're going to have an easy day in the peloton or not, are you going to sit there, are you going to have to start, the race is going to start 10k in, or is the race going to start with 10k to go? You don't really know for sure, and therefore it's really hard to put a number on exactly what bike is going to be fastest on any given day. And I think that's why we've not gone down this absolute trust in the physics side. So my understanding is we should probably be more on aero bikes, but until we get there objectively, it's a bit more of a hard argument to have.
I think my favourite rider that kind of bucks the trend a little bit is a surprising rider, because I would think of him as very typically and traditionally French, is Romain Bardet. And he spends a lot of time on that Scott foil, which is, to be fair, relatively light. And I think he took the first stage of the Tour last year on that bike.
He did, yeah. And what I really like about Romain Bardet is he gets Scott to make him a custom version with traditional bend handlebars. So it looks really good too. So you can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, well, he is French, so at least he's not Alaphilippe with 42 centimetre round handlebars, cotton socks, and everything else that makes me cringe.
Well, we're talking of cotton, Dan. Actually, one of the questions I wrote down, and this is a neat little segue, is I wanted to know why, in your opinion, are all the Specialized teams still running Specialized turbo cotton tyres rather than switching to the Specialized the tubeless models? Because as far as I'm aware, the kind of tubeless models that Specialized produces now have tested, fairly well in comparison to the turbo cotton on things like bicyclerolling-resistance.com. And I always wondered if it's just a kind of like a ride feel thing. Like the turbo cottons maybe feel a little bit more like tubulars did because they got the cotton sidewalls, and maybe they just don't like the tubeless. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, having now moved to a Specialized sponsored team.
So I'd firstly caveat and say I started just after the Olympics and started officially full-time in October. So I've only been here for 8 weeks full-time. So starting to get a handle on the reasons why decisions have been made, and then also trying to create the data that I need to inform the decisions I think should be made. And I'm not quite there yet. So I can't give a full objective opinion as to why I think one tyre should be selected over another. However, I think the Turbo Cotton is a good tyre and it has its place. However, like as we previously discussed, there's horses for courses. Every rider, every stage, every roll, all the different conditions, they all work in different ways. So like you've got your Turbo Cotton is what you'd kind of call an open tubular, where it's basically tread glued on a cotton base, whereas your more tubeless tyres tend to be anyway fully vulcanized. So then they end up with different aero and rolling resistance parameters, and you're trying to pick the optimal between the two. And it's a bit more complex than just go down that route and that's going to be faster. And then you've got people like Vittoria who are coming in with fully vulcanized style cotton tyres. It's a complex world of tyre dynamics, and then you throw in all the things around rolling resistance, grip, damping. I'd say they're the next frontier. Well, I've said plenty of times in media that I think that's where we should be focusing our effort. And aerodynamics are great and fun, but we're starting to pick the low-hanging fruit, whereas tyres, we're nowhere near.
That's interesting that you say we're nowhere near, because I was wondering whether there was much further we could go with tyres. Obviously we're seeing a lot of people like running time trial tyres in road races now. And when people first started running, say like the Conti GP 5000 TT or the Vittoria Corsa Speed, I was wondering whether we'd see a kind of spate of punctures, and we haven't really. Like, it's been really good. So do you think there's still kind of like scope for for tyre companies to make even lighter, even faster tyres that potentially are still just as usable? Maybe the kind of mileage suffers, but do you think there's more to get there?
Yeah, I hope so. At least I think there is from the work they've done so far. Don't want to obviously give the game away on exactly where and how I think performance will come, but I think they're just not well understood. And if you don't understand something, how are you ever going to optimize it?
And one of the kind of conversation, obviously we're talking about how to make riders faster here. And one of the things that's kind of been in the news recently is that the Tour de France director, Christian Prudhomme, basically said that, I think it was in a press conference or something recently, that riders are basically going too fast. And he said, it's making it dangerous because the kind of cars and the motorbikes can't get out of the way, and if they're going faster, that's leading to kind of worse crashes and things like that. Now obviously people have responded. Jonathan Vaughters came out quite strongly, and
he called them fat cats, didn't he?
Jonathan Vaughters called them fat cats. I mean, we've never raced a Tour. I don't think Christian Prudhomme has ever raced a Tour. Obviously, I understand you haven't raced a Tour, Dan, but you have raced at an extremely high level. I saw on Twitter the other day you suggested potentially increasing the weight limit. But do you think there's anything, do you think that, riders are going too fast these days? And if so, is there anything meaningful that you could actually do to slow people down?
No, I don't think they're going too fast. I think any protagonist within the sport who proclaims speed is the problem either is trying to distract you from the actual problem or doesn't understand the problem. And the problem is unsafe roads, unsafe equipment, and poor, inadequate or slow medical response when the worst does happen. So by changing speed, you change the magnitude of the effect when a crash happens. But you don't actually, or in most scenarios, don't actually change whether a crash does or doesn't happen due to speed. That's predominantly course. Like if we look at all the major crashes, or the vast majority, it's either something's come out of nowhere, speed bump, road furniture, whatever it might be, that riders weren't aware of, or a corner that was tighter, or there was diesel on the road, or remember back in the day when the caravan in the opening stage of the Tour de France had what was it? It was like washing up liquid as a sponsor, and they had like a bubble machine and it ended up on the road. And you had Tony Martin just going crazy at the front, like, let's just calm down. Just things like that. They're what cause crashes, not the rider's speed. And I think the reason it's gone down this argument of speed is to detract or to distract everybody and discuss the point of speed and to try and slow them down. Whereas realistically, and the harder and more expensive approach is to make safer courses. And then by extension, safer bikes and better medical interventions. And the better medical interventions are where is the rider, how fast they're traveling, what's their heart rate, have they hit their head, and have everything in there to rapidly respond. And a really good parallel is what happened in Formula One when Ayrton Senna died. Before there were a fair few drivers passing away, Roland Ratzenberger that exact weekend. And it took the figurehead, like the highest profile driver in the sport, to die in an avoidable accident for the FIA to take action. And the action, yes, immediately was cut speeds, but actually in time it was intentional to create a car design that was consistent all the time, i.e. it didn't drastically change in grip through downforce very quickly, which was what was happening at that point in time. The car's bottomed out, the diffuser stalled, car washed out, hit a barrier really quickly, and then create circuits where there's enough runoff, there's gravel traps, and that they have systems and protocols in place that medical responses are quicker. And I think cycling's in the exact same situation, that it probably will take, and let's be honest, it's probably not even that far away, a significant profile rider having a life-changing or life-ending injury for this to happen. And we can either action it now or we can action it when that happens. And I know which I prefer to do. And I've had discussions with the UCI, and to give them their due, they are actually tackling this problem. They're not burying their heads in the sand, or at least the people that I've been speaking with, and the CPA and the AIGCP, exactly the same situation. They want to improve safety, but to discuss speed is detracting from the actual problem of we need safer, more consistent bikes where you can be at the limit of braking, be at the limit of grip and not crash, or you can crash your bike and it's still safe to ride. Much, much, much safer courses and better medical interventions. And that's what's going to stop these things from happening, not just being 5% slower. And that's a big rant, but I'm really passionate.
No, I think that's great. I mean, like, you know, obviously you made the comparison between cycling and Formula One there. Obviously, you know, one of the kind of big things that we've seen recently in Formula One is something like, you know, the halo for the cars, which is kind of like a little, you know, like essentially like a roll cage. Obviously, it's trickier with bikes because, you know, what could we do to, you know, make bikes safer, for example? As I say, you mentioned, like, you know, increasing the weight limit. Do you think that would allow a kind of greater factor of safety, for example?
Factor of safety in design, factor of safety in a lot of aspects as well. So even things like bottle cage retention. So a lot of crashes are caused by loose bottles in the peloton. They roll around and they're really heavy and they're not compressible. So bottle cages at the moment is one way you can really drive weight, and we've got them down to like 12 grams or something ridiculous. We'll just regulate them, make them 50 grams, which is easily achievable, and then the retention will go up. Or we'll just have a clasp mechanism so they're locked in place. And I bet that would cut out 10, 20 crashes a year, just like pulling figures out of there. And I'm sure the UCI, or at least somebody safer, maybe have numbers on how many crashes are caused by things like that. And I think increasing the weight limit, it does a lot of other things. It enables you to carry those additional sensors, additional systems, have a safer bike around factors of safety, and just design the bikes that they are a bit more fit for purpose, because we are pushing factors of safety to get closer to 6.8, and that's just the necessity. We're having titanium bolts, we're hollowing out bolts, we're 3D printing everything. It's getting into an arms race so that people can be at 6.8 and not take a hit on performance in the sense of like aerodynamics, because you want the bike to perform as well as it can, but at that limit. And it's just not a nice place to be. And most motorsport formula have a weight limit, even though they have a wealth of safety tests, like crash structures, everything else, but they have the weight limit so that you're not chasing it because it's detrimental to the sport, and which has happened last year in Formula One when, and I know I keep going about Formula One, I'm a big fan and that's my background, but cycling tends to be 10, 20, 30 years behind motorsport in general. But what happened is all the cars were too heavy, so they were stripping paint off. Well, okay, you've got 5 or 10 kilos back, but you've killed your sponsorship. So is that good for the sport? Well, you get short-term performance but long-term loss, and we're in the exact same situation in cycling. You get short-term performance and long-term loss. And from a safety perspective, can you do other things? Can you have like the inflatable neck braces? Can you have higher crash safety tests on helmets? The helmet volumes are bigger, and maybe they're heavier, but actually they're better at absorbing crashes. There's like a lot of ideas and things that you can do, but they're mass. They take weight, and if weight is the target and you're nowhere near the limit, then people are never going to be incentivized to do it unless they're regulated to.
I think it doesn't really take a genius to think that if you increase the weight limit on a bike with the current carbon tech, you could quite easily put a lot of safety features within the frame that linked up to, say, a helmet.
Which you mean like kind of crash sensors or kind of like radio transmitters or something like that? Would that include that in the bike weight?
Even for heart health as well. I think there could be a lot of things.
So you saying you'd be in favour of raising the weight limit, would you?
This
it's not
hill
really a
climb...
for you, UCI weight limit though, is it? No one's checking your bike these days.
Funnily enough, no. I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah,
I think it would absolutely kill climbing bikes in the full market, and my ethos would be even more obsolete than it currently is. But yeah, I'm not going to
well,
say
it has a place. I don't think it's really in the UCI world. I think that is like this is what we really could do if you really push it. And from an engineering perspective, I enjoy that as a challenge. I like, what can we really do? But from a performance perspective, then the trade-off isn't particularly there. That you're losing out so much more on the aerodynamics because you're trying to create a super light, stiff structure, not a fast aero structure, which the vast majority of people, at least in most scenarios, need. Okay, like we said earlier, caveat, there's people trying to race really fast up hills and there's a time and place for it, and that is really where it wins out. But yeah, it'd be nice to have that additional mass because you could do so much more with it, and people wouldn't be trying to like swap out or take off the Velon boxes and things like that. They'd be like, well, who cares? Because I've got another 500 grams to spare, so you can have onboard cameras, you can have all the onboard telemetry. Like in Formula 1. Jeez, I'm sorry, I'm a
Don't worry, I like Formula 1 too.
Yeah,
I love it.
I was watching it.
Yeah,
but you can watch a race and you can pick all 20 drivers and have onboard of exactly what's going on with a 360 camera and all the live telemetry. Like, how cool is that? And that's what the next generation are genuinely interested in. That's what excites them, and that's what the direction that I believe personally we have to go in as a sport.
So we've talked about making it safer.
Well, one thing I was where the kind of weight limit seems to have been ignored completely, and I'd like to segue into track cycling here because I went to Renishaw basically in South Wales the other week, and I got to see the Hope bike, and obviously how much does it weigh? And they just kind of said, 7 point something. No, it's just too specific. And obviously I think that track seems to be an area now where like they really have kind of ignored the weight limit. And obviously I'm sure people are trying to make things as light as possible because why not, but no one is riding around on a 6.8 kilo bike and taking off aero stuff to get there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fair to say that speeds have gone up in track racing quite a lot recently, and it doesn't seem to be any more dangerous as far as I can tell. But like, yeah, Dan, I guess be cool to ask you, like, what was it like to kind of compete at the Olympics, and what did you think of the Hope bike?
So first point, my Pinarello Bleed 3D HRF, I think that's the correct term, is 10.2 kilos.
Wow.
Which when it got weighed, the UCI were like, eh? So then I got full X-rayed. I've got the full X-ray report, no motor in it.
That would be a reveal, Dan. Imagine that. Hell of a podcast.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I really love the Hope bike as a concept. Like their whole interaction with the rider, and on a velodrome, it makes so much more sense because you have a very narrow band of working parameters around airspeed and yaw angles. So super easy to optimize around, much harder to in the open world where you could be at 20k an hour, could be at 80k an hour, could be at 0 degrees of yaw, could be at 25. So it's significantly more challenging to have that kind of rider-bike interaction perfectly modelled and perfectly interacting, whereas on the track it's pretty cool. So yeah, I like the fact they've continually refined that and done some cool things to make it even better. And I think the next generation after that, they'll really make another step forward again. But the Olympics themselves, I think, some positive experiences and some negative ones. I think the video of my crash has leaked out into the press and the media, so probably a bit more open about that. I was trying to keep it under wraps because the last thing you can do with pre-Olympics is a media storm, which happened inevitably anyway with the news of me leaving Ineos coming out a couple of days before the Olympics. That wasn't ideal either. So the racing itself was pretty good in that we went faster than we've ever gone before. We were going pretty quick in holding camp, and that gets excited, but obviously you think the same of everybody, and everybody's trying to find out how the Danes going, how the Italians going, how the Aussies going, how the Kiwis going, just keeping tabs. And they're all at different velodromes all around the world, and you're like, oh, I know so and so, they were watching this session and they said they were doing this, and then you actually get there. And in fact, our very first train session, the Danes were on just before, so as we arrived they did a flying 2k, and they averaged like 12.8 second laps, which is what's that in speed? 70 something k an hour, and we're like, what the hell is going on here? Have we just missed it completely? Are we way off? Yeah. I mean, I've since spoke to them after, but they said the intent was like a full gas 2k, and it was a bit scary at the time. It probably highlights that you shouldn't keep an eye on your competitors that much, just leave them to themselves and focus on your own performance. But and we executed good performances. I was definitely not at my best after that crash, and that's frustrating. And obviously it's the way it goes. And then come back to the whole safety point. Yeah, just crashing into riders on the track is not something you should be doing, and I hold my hands up in that respect. And it's just the worst time possible for it to happen. But yeah, I think in that final, it was probably the most exciting team pursuit Olympic final we've ever had. To nearly go to the line, bar Ethan slipping off the end of his saddle, and to keep it within 2/10 the entire race was pretty awesome. Obviously, it would have been nice to be the other way around and 2/10 up rather than 2/10 down, but sport's about entertainment, and I'm pretty sure it was a damn entertaining Olympic final.
Yeah, we saw so much speculation about why Ethan didn't like his saddle anymore. Was that sheer fatigue? Was it he was just gone?
So actually, at that point in time, I thought he had gone to change, i.e. on the very last lap, on the straight as well. And Ethan had been so regimented and so direct to everybody that we never changed on the last lap. Whoever's on the front finishes. And I'm like, we're in the Olympic gold medal final and you change on the last lap. What? Like, have you just completely lost your mind? And then afterwards, about 10 minutes later, actually, I'd watched the video and saw that he'd fallen off. And then I've watched it back a few times. And what happens is he drops down to the Côte d'Azur, so off the track slightly, and then comes back up. And obviously, there's a bit of a junction there. The Côte d'Azur is at about 10 degrees, and where he was on the track's about 30. So it's a bit of a bump. And he was on the limit of the saddle, and that little bump just knocked him off the end. And that was that.
Should have had some Tony Martin grip tape on his saddle.
Yeah.
No, we've all seen those pictures.
Yeah. I'm sure we can share that photo on the video.
Yeah, we'll have to dig out a picture of that for those who weren't around 10 years ago. You know, I mean, like, kind of, yeah, obviously, like, absolutely incredible race to watch. I do kind of like, I wonder if it, you know, for you personally, if it was nice to kind of, you know, silence a few of the people who had sort of said over the years that, you know, you were all about kind of aero and not a particularly great athlete, but actually obviously to make it to the Olympic final of an event like that, you know, and then to almost win gold, you know, that, like, personally, that must have felt pretty good. Even if it obviously understandably you would have liked to have gone that one step further.
Oh yeah, I think I'm very happy with my career. As much as all the points of not an elite athlete, I think I got to a good level. I can't really deny that.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it was all right.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, you did all right. Talking of like the next level. Obviously, like, you know, you're a former UCI World Hour Record holder. Again, not a bad level. Obviously, Filippo Ganna holds that now. You know, do you think he'll give it another go? And do you think, you know, in the kind of like in this current generation, is it possible to kind of break 60k?
So I'm thankful you gave me a bit of a heads up on this one, because I ran some numbers, because it's always quite interesting just to dig in on the models. What do they say? So I think, firstly, I don't think Filippo will have another go in the near future. Just in the conversations we had soon after, I think he would maybe have a go towards the end of his career, a bit like a lot of athletes have done, like kind of early on and then your final hurrah, as it were. But I do believe other athletes will have a go, and I do believe it's breakable. So I've ran some numbers on. Well, I knew what I had a very good idea of what I did when I broke the record, and then the improvements I've made since then into the Olympics. And based on that, with my aero as it is now, for the same power I did the record for, I'd just about nudge 57 on the nose, give or take. So yeah, I found nearly 1.5k, 1.4, 1.5k in aero, basically.
Wow.
Is that from things like the short cranks?
Yeah, that's one of the major gains. But other things, skin suits, and what else can I talk about? Extensions, things I can't talk about. But yeah, there's been some good improvements for sure, and I could get close now. And then if you add a few other things, like if I went to Aguascalientes at 1850, then with about a 7.5% drop off, which is what I'd expect, I'd get 57.9. If I went a little bit higher to like 2.3, I'd maybe crack 58. Bear in mind, these are all models, and how your aero changes at altitude is another interesting thing that people don't really account for, because your air density changes, your Reynolds number changes, your effective CDA, your CDA effectively increases. But yeah, for me to do 60k, so I actually did a few flying 5Ks at 60k an hour, just quicker, in Manchester pre-Worlds. And for me to do 60k an hour in Manchester is about 405 watts, like flying effort, not standing. So there's a little bit to add on there in the standing. That was only a 5-minute effort. I think if I went max, maybe I could have dragged it out to like 8, 9, 10 minutes. Definitely not an hour for sure. If I went to altitude, it'd take me about 345 watts. So about 5 watts less than I did at sea level to do 60k. So it's not impossible. I definitely can't do 345 watts altitude. I can tell you that straight off the bat. However, there are athletes in the world who are close to in my aerodynamics, probably a little bit smaller than me. I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure people can guess, who have more watts and are close in aero, and I'm pretty sure they could have a good nudge at it and be pretty damn close if they went to altitude to crack.
Well, it's funny here, when we talk about lower CDAs, I always remember Xavier Disley asking me to guess who, this guy who runs Aero Coach, who the lowest CDA he'd ever tested was, and I kind of racked my brain for ages trying to think of all the great time trialists he must have worked with. It turned out it was Domenico Pozzovivo.
No.
Because he's just so small.
Get off.
He didn't say what's the CDA, that was the thing. So he just said lowest CDA.
Didn't Pozzovivo win a time trial against Cancellara in the Giro in
I don't know. Anyway, that's a little fun. That's a little aside. All right. Well, I mean, that's interesting because I was kind of expecting you to sort of say that 60k was going to be really difficult for kind of, even maybe Ghana, but so that could be. I think obviously the interesting thing with the hour record is it's kind of like it's so binary, right? You either break it or you don't, and I think that clearly puts a lot of people off. Now, it obviously takes quite a bit of bravery to give it a go, but you did the UCI hour record, but I think you did one in your amateur days as well, maybe around Palmer Park. Is that right, Dan?
That was the first one, March 2014. A bloody cold day. It's about 8 degrees or something silly, and I did 46.9 if I remember correctly.
Do you reckon you could beat that, Liam?
Absolutely not. I don't ride for an hour anymore.
Down below, people, if you'd like to see Liam take on Dan Bigham's hour record, and we'll make that happen.
Funnily enough, we do have a video idea on the cards where we take a chipped e-bike and system and put it on a Quintana Roo tri-bike that's ridiculous and see if we can beat the hour record.
Probably not.
And then apologise to Ghana immediately.
But Dan, if Liam was going to try and take on your hour record, what are the kind of, we'll kind of move on to kind of segue into cheap and easy gains for unfit amateurs. What would be the kind of like the low hanging fruit, the best places to start, kind of best bang for buck things that Liam should be paying attention to if he was going to give a go at something like that?
For an hour record, predominantly it's aero, and that's not actually. The usual things are obviously skin suits, helmets, position, wheels. Tire and tire wheel interaction is important as well. Frame. However, picking the right conditions and how obviously they impact on aerodynamics predominantly, and that is super critical. How you get that Goldilocks of temperature, altitude, humidity. So lower humidity is bad for air density, but it's really good for sweating, so your heat capacity, like your ability to get rid of heat. So you've got a trade-off there. Temperature, obviously lower temp, your air density goes up, which is bad, and your roll resistance goes up, which is bad. But also if your temp goes up, then your ability to sweat reduces because you can't evaporate as much, and you get hotter as well. And then with barometric pressure as well, as you go up with altitude, your barometric pressure reduces, the partial pressure of oxygen reduces, so your oxygen supply to your muscle reduces. So there's an optimal of all these three you're trying to trade off, and that's actually really important, and that can have a huge impact, like kilometers worth of impact on your actual result. So that's actually one of the big ones if you're going to have a go for an hour record. But if you're Joe Bloggs on the street, the big things are pretty much, I'd say, rolling resistance, so good tires, good either in latex inner tubes, stay away from butyl, and TPU aren't quite as good. Even the best ones aren't quite as good as latex, as much as the marketing claims suggest. Tubeless, big fan of. Aero socks, good ones anyway. Not all of them are that great. Again, marketing, really frustrating. We're in this world now where people can make claims and without going to test, it's hard to validate. And by extension, I say trying to test yourself. And I know that sounds like a big thing of learn how to aero test, but it's actually relative. As long as you've got a power meter and a speed sensor, it's actually free to do. Learn virtual elevation, Chung method. It's how I started. It's basically just rearranging the drag equation. Anyone that says that virtual elevation is a bad thing, then, and I know some aero sensor companies do that, it's just complete fake news. That's just the equation of motion rearranged into a really useful format. So you can do literal out and backs, learn how to test. What position do you hold? You've got a climbing helmet, you've got an aero helmet, try the two, borrow something from your mate, try a different jersey, try some different socks, try some different shoes. Learn to test. I know it sounds like a hard thing to do, but the investment, it's free performance versus spending hundreds or thousands of pounds on a new wheel or a new helmet or a new skin suit. Just find out what works for you and take a bit of time, invest in your performance, and that's how you'll keep moving forward.
And I want to move on to our last question really quickly because I know you've got to go in a bit. a lot of those fake claims, let's say, do get bandied about in the cycling media quite a bit. I was just wondering what your take is on us, the idiots behind the keyboards.
Yeah, how could we do things better? Because I think, like you mentioned, you've got a background in Formula One. Liam and I don't. Liam and I have background in, kind of dossier about subjects rather than real things. But like, what do you think that, we in the cycling media could do better to help everyday riders, cut through stuff?
So I think firstly, I'd say you do generally in media, it's a necessity within every industry, and even more so in cycling, that teams and riders don't engage with the media anywhere near enough for like optimizing their own benefits. So whether that's like, hold on, right side.
There's a pro cyclist in the background.
Don't engage with the media anywhere near enough for actual benefits, because it's a virtuous cycle that, like, if you develop a new component and you achieve performance, then great, but you've got the people being the industry need to know about it, and the media, you are the primary outlet to accessing effectively our market, whether that's Red Bull, whether that's Bora, Specialized, SRAM, whoever. So engaging in the media is super critical, and something as What Bike I think we did really well with, whether positively or negatively. We always engaged with the media because it got a lot of traction. In respect of marketing claims, obviously trying to validate is the key bit, but it is challenging because you need to have a good comprehension, a good understanding of the physics to understand where people are playing with the numbers, as it were, to their own advantage, and that kind of knowledge takes time to accumulate or takes money to get. So it's a hard one to do. I would say trying to validate properly is worth doing, and I think the media has its place for that, and it's great to see people like you guys, whether Cycling News as well, Escape Collective, obviously you've got independent ones like Bicycle Rolling Resistance, etc. They're doing independent testing, and it's really nice to see. In Tour Magazine, actually, they're really cool. So there's loads of attempts going in the right direction, and I think we'll continually improve, because every time you do a test, there's always pushback. Oh, you should have done this, you should have done it like that.
Yeah, we had a lot of that of our rolling resistance test.
Yeah. Your methodology got absolutely hammered.
Well, no, I think it was just people didn't like the results. Basically, when we did a rolling resistance test at Silverstone, for those who weren't aware, the Vittoria Corsa Pro just tested
Didn't
really
test
badly.
well.
Now, if we'd had more time, more money, we could have tested multiple samples. Maybe there was something wrong, but the kind of, obviously we tested at Silverstone. I tried to use a protocol that was similar to bicyclerollingresistance.com, and people the results just didn't line up. Is that something you've experienced, Dan, in various testing, that sometimes like results just don't line up with kind of what other people have done, and then basically all you can do then is just go do more testing?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it depends on how you're testing, like what systems you have, what you're trying to measure, your protocols. So you should not only have an idea of the measure, but how good the measure is in itself. Every rig has its flaws, every protocol has its flaws. And to be honest, I leave tests sometimes and I'm like, that just doesn't quite make sense. And sometimes it's completely correct, just your mental model of what's going on isn't correct, and you have to then pull that apart and do a bit more research and a bit more reading to understand why. Sometimes it's just an erroneous test, but if you don't know that, because you don't have the experience that underpins those kind of tests, you don't know what to look for, and you don't know what would flag a good or a bad test, or what to keep an eye on. Did tyre temperature drift, for argument's sake? Was it really cold when you did the Corsa Pro Speed test? Was it the first one and everything hadn't warmed up by that point, and then suddenly the whole room's 5 degrees warmer and your rolling resistance is 10% lower because of that?
I'd just like to say there wasn't any of that, and we did keep an eye on those things, and I spent so long looking at the data, and I even showed it to a couple of people who couldn't find anything obviously incorrect with the data. But like I said, we only tested kind of like one sample of each tyre, because obviously time is money in these places, and it maybe there was just something about that particular setup. This happened like 2 years ago, and it still haunts me, Liam.
He still doesn't sleep at night.
I still don't sleep at night. Anyway, Dan, thanks so much for joining us. I know you've got to go now, but it's been a real pleasure, and I hope you didn't find it too stressful either.
No, I always enjoy conversations like this, so thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Well, Simon, what a broad-ranging conversation that was. That was fantastic.
Absolutely. Always fascinating to hear from Dan. And of course, as always, if you have any thoughts, comments or feedback, you can email us at podcast@bikeradar.com. Otherwise, Liam, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.